On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we bring back Nick Smallridge. Nick, it's been too long. You've actually been clogging up my email because there's two newsletters, and they might even been from like 2024, so it's probably 2 years now, maybe more, maybe less. I don't remember. But anyways, it's been in my inbox. I've circled back a few times because I think they're so good, but they're a little bit in the weeds. So we need to untangle this a little bit. So glad to have you back.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me back. Yeah, I was excited to hear that those two were clogging up your inbox. I think some of these that do get lost in the weeds. It is fun to kind of navigate how we get there. So yeah, excited to be back and excited to dive into these.
All right, well, let's set the table a little bit. So the first one was called Never Let Them Know What You Think. The second
Yes.
one was Who do you coach when the ball is at their feet? So, how many coaches feel the urge to yell, turn, pass, skate, all that stuff, which I find when I do that, I'm not coaching very good, or I'm doing too much. I'm getting too much into the weeds. I need to take a step back. But just a micro moment that we can isolate, and then the first one being, don't tell them what you think. Like, how many times as a coach, and I'm going to just challenge the listeners here to think back to a time where you were observing and you were like, okay, they're just not locked in. I got to say something, or they're too locked in, and you want to say something. Is that really the right thing to go? So I'm going to just set that table a little bit, and Nick, let you riff.
Yeah, I think is the social cultural piece, there is an expectation that coaches are instructing. And I think in large part that comes from a very, very positive place. Like we want to help our players, we want to help our team. And that social cultural piece of the coach instructs, we want to fix. So we have in our mind an idea of what things should be. And we do the best we can with the players to try to help guide them or at least tell them. And that's kind of where we get into that difficult space. We want to tell them what they should do. Um, there was a moment several years ago where we were at practice and a player had done something well, and I was like, "Hey, great job!" And they immediately made a mistake. And one of my players who was kind of standing off to the side next to me, and she says, "You don't notice that?" And I was like, "What?" And she says, "Every time you say good job to somebody, they mess up. Immediately they mess up." And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah. Have you not noticed that? We all noticed it." And it was kind of one of those like spotlight moments where the light was shined back on me in terms of, wow, the what we say makes an impact, and it's not always necessarily like a binary or cause and effect. My intention is to try to support you. My intention is to try to help you, but in doing so, the method ends up becoming, counterproductive. And so, when we kind of build that into more like uh, more coach-ish kinds of moments. There's another moment that stood out, and that's the one that always like eats at my gut. We are driving to a game against a difficult opponent, and we're kind of warming up, and I'm watching the players. And I'm like, they are not locked in. They do not seem like they should be. In my mind, they don't seem like they have the right mentality for what the moment should have based on what I think they should be doing. And they were light, and it was very positive. And I was like, you guys need to be locked in. And so I got so frustrated, and I stopped them. And I was like, you need to take this seriously. This is a serious game. This is a serious opponent. And, it was very quiet, and they tried to do what I instructed and quote unquote lock in. And I was like, okay, all right, now we're looking good. And we got rolled. It was one of the worst performances I had seen. And, I think the previous moment with the great job, and these were all kind of swirling together at the same time. And it kind of dawned on me, like, this is not effective. And if you've seen some of my other work, I coach from constraints led approach, ecological dynamics, and a lot of that has to do with viewing skill from the context of player, opponent, task, environment, and individual. And so recognizing that, it's not a very, very binary linear, I say this, you do this. It's like, maybe I should just shut up. Maybe my role is not so much to tell them what they should do, but create conditions for which they can be successful for themselves. Because, as we were talking before we started recording, you got to meet them where they're at. Whether or not it's what you think they should or should not be doing, is it relevant and applicable to who they are in this moment? And so those players at that moment did not need me to tell them to lock in. They were locked in. I just didn't realize what that looked like from the context of a high school female player in that moment. They needed to be relaxed, and they were, and I messed it up. And so, I almost find like the rule of thumb is, if I'm not 100% sure, just don't say anything. Wait and let's see how it plays out, and then we can circle back. Because if we don't have that moment where we go, it didn't work out so well, maybe what can we do next time? We need those to help players learn. And so mistakes can be very, very beneficial. And so sometimes you just need to let those mistakes play out, because if you don't, then you might make a bigger mistake than you had intended.
I call that the do no harm phase. Just do no harm. Sometimes coaches do more harm than they realize and does not actually hit their objectives. It's like, is what you're saying actually achieving what you want? And many times it is not. So how can we
Yeah,
realize this? You had some spotlight moments where it really shone on you, but a lot of us maybe don't get that kind of feedback, especially if we're working with the younger ages. And I would say it's almost like you need that self-observation a little bit, like pick out a moment of an area you want to do a little bit better, or just sit back and watch things and try to pick up as much as you can in observation, just like Messi does for the first 5 minutes of every game. He's just looking around, looking around, looking around. Well, he's just picking up the information, the critical stuff that he will eventually use later. But if you're not observing well, it's a real problem. And then just staying back until you're ready to go in and you understand when and why and how you're going to go about it. Otherwise, just do no harm. Set some good conditions in the practice or game or whatever, and sit back as much as possible.
absolutely. Well, and if we shift the metaphor of the coach as the instructor to the coach as a bridge, we can that shifts the mentality to, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm helping you get to a place that might be even better than I had as a coach previsioned. So, like, to your point, like, let's sit back, observe, let's watch, and then before I say what you should do, maybe ask a question. Tell me about that. What did you think? What happened there? Like, did you feel like that went well? Did you feel like it didn't go well? What else? What other options did you have? If we don't know where they're at or what they're seeing or why they're making decisions that they are, it's going to be very difficult for us to kind of bridge that gap between what they might have done differently. And I hesitate to say better, but differently, because again, I'm not necessarily sure what I think they should do is always necessarily the best thing that is for them. um
Yeah, and I love the leading with curiosity. Like it's us together working towards better, rather than here's the path, let me show you it, just walk it. Rather than, oh, let's figure out, okay, how can you work your compass, your navigation skills? So I, I've been reading quite a few books this summer, and a constant theme that's come up is basically like, how do you help players become their own best coach? And then at that point, you can shine light onto things that they haven't thought about, they've never experienced, and truly be helpful in uncovering things and in the process, to your point, like being more of a guide, but just like learning with that, leading with the curiosity to help them become their own best coach, and just being that guide that helps mentor and shifts attention and ask great questions that allows them to think it through. Like I think back to Arsene Wenger, his time at Arsenal, and a lot of the players consistently said like he just never gave you any answers. Like you had to, he would pose a question that you should pose to yourself. Robin van Persie was like, "Why aren't you one of the world class players? You've got all these around you. Why aren't you one of them?" That was the right question for him. Um, Patrick Vieira would be like, or I'll go with Henri because he's the best striker in Arsenal history. It's like, how can you be effective when you don't have the ball? And can you play the same way with every single teammate? Clearly not. Like you've got to adjust your game. So, but it was asking the questions rather than them actually being given the answer. He would always like, I'm not telling you, figure it out.
Well, and I think, and if you think back to that specific example, and you think, what if he had said you should be doing something XYZ? That completely shifts the narrative, and it puts weight on the player's shoulders in a way that is not going to elicit curiosity. And so if the question is, could you, then there's an exploration of, well, could I? Where could I fit into this space, as opposed to, oh, what should I be doing? What should I be doing? I think that the idea of asking a question in and of itself creates the conditions for curiosity and exploration in a way that, again, is going to elicit much more effective and much more relevant solutions for that specific player. Yeah, it's funny. Thierry Henry, I would say Bergkamp. I don't know if we're talking about number nines, but best striker for Arsenal, I'd have to go with Bergkamp. That goal that he did, where he against Newcastle received the ball with the inside of his foot on his left, spun around the opposite direction as the ball went around the opposite direction of the defender, and he received it and held off the defender and one touched into the corner. And I remember the quote at the when he was asked about it, and he was like, "There's nothing else I could do. That was all I could do." It was fascinating. Like, it's like, how do you do these things? How do you do these things? Well, he wasn't told to do it. It was just, that was all he could do. He was in the moment. That was what he could do. And that was all, it's like, don't tell them what they should do, because otherwise who in their right mind would ever imagine doing what he did in that moment? The same way that who would imagine that Henri would have the audacity to, with some of the finishes he did. Somebody along the way just said, I'm just going to shut up and just let them play and, create some conditions, see what happens. And holy cow, wow, the ceiling has been raised in amazing ways.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the best, most creative players basically were not told what they should do and just did things. And it's like Messi, just like, what can I teach him? I set up some conditions, maybe guide a few areas here and there, but otherwise let it happen, let the mistakes. But I think the two things that coaches we'll say even parents here can really key in on is two phrases: you need and you should. If you're ever using you need and you should, probably a better way than what you're currently doing. Just like put those in your mind for the next week or two, and just notice people around you and yourself using you need and you should. And those are some opportunities for growth, which is actually hilarious. I didn't realize this, but my mom used to say all the time, you need, and I was like, no, no, we don't need. My brother, he once got an award for being like basically the most observant. Like every player got a word, and my brother got observant. And I was laughing because he starts pulling these things out in family functions, and there are a few other ones, but that was one of the ones he picked out. Mom said it all the time. You need to, you need. Uh, and took me until now to actually have that click in my mind of like, that's an opportunity of growth that we can all have, is the needs, you needs and you shoulds. We're doing that. We're a little wayward.
I literally had one of those moments like yesterday. My son was out in the backyard kicking the ball around, and I wanted, and I could feel that, hey, you should, and it's like, okay, what could I rephrase this with? If I'm not going to say this, and my intention is that I see some area of where it could be improved or whatever you want to say. If I do have that, okay, I said you need or you should. What do I replace it with? What do you think? Could you XYZ? What do you think? Could you XYZ? So I love that. If for parents and coaches, if you can tie in to these phrases, you need, you should, what might you replace it with? Could you? What could you do? I think that helps tweak it, because you want to have something there. But yeah, is it should, you need to? It's interesting.
I also love the phrase I noticed. Like we're trying to bring up some like self-awareness and accurate self-assessment. And half the time when I do like the I noticed this about you, love to hear more, or whatever shape or fashion you want to phrase that. It always leads to I didn't know I was doing that, or I base it usually comes from a place of like, yeah, this is my strongest suit and I'm just going to abuse it as much as I possibly can. And it helps expand better accurate self-assessment, or helps us have a conversation towards what are other ways we can retool what you're doing. So now you're providing a greater challenge to the defense, rather than I'm just going to do this 7 times and one of those sevens is actually going to work.
I think,
So I noticed.
from from a coaching standpoint, one of the things that a couple of things you just mentioned there reminded me, like, if you have the ability to record yourself, um, that is a fantastic tool to hone in, because I think we do. I imagine myself communicating in a certain way, and I notice this, um, but am I actually doing those things? I When I had to do my USSFC course, we had to videotape ourselves, and it was very, very eye opening, because I think we get in the mindset of we are doing certain things, and we're communicating in a certain way, and what we say and what we actually say when we look back on it is markedly different. And because that specific phrase, I noticed, I remember a moment just like that, where in the moment I felt like that's what I was doing, and it was very neutral. I saw this, and when I look back on the video and replayed it was like I noticed, and then I immediately just shifted to you should. I noticed, but then now you should. I completely glossed over the I noticed. Tell me, what do you think? I missed the engagement with the player and then went right to fix it, fix it, fix it. It's like, is that
Yeah,
necessarily what?
yeah, you just like shortcutted their entire personal feedback loop and ability to be their own best coach rather than allowing it to play out. Yeah.
Because they might have noticed it as well, but I didn't give them the time to like respond. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, I did good. I was like, and I was like, no, I did not. I did not. I just wasted 30 more seconds of that kid's time, and they were just like, oh my god, what now? Ugh.
So silence is a powerful thing too. Like even on the bus rides to and from, just like bringing something up and then just shutting up. So hard for so many coaches not to fill that silence, with
Well,
their intelligence rather than just let it be. The player will eventually say something, or they'll be so out of it. You're like, okay, we need to start with accurate self-assessment and self-awareness.
And I think the irony in that is that, the more you try to fix, the more you try to help, there's a tendency to have less influence over time. I think if players are always under the impression that you're trying to fix them, and you're trying to quote unquote help them, but you're always in that fixing mindset, they tend, in my experience, to be less open or less willing to come to you with things, because they're like, oh, he's just going to try to tell me what to do, and it's just like, is that really going to help them? I found that by saying less and not telling them what I think, there is a tendency for them to be more inclined to come to me with questions, and what should I do here? And then it's like, okay, if you're asking me, then I'm happy to tell you. But if it's me coming to you and saying what you should do, I'm more likely going to close the door of engaging you and having positive influence, uh, and less likely to if I keep my mouth shut. I've had more players come to me to ask, hey, what can we do? What should I do here? I don't know. And you end up having more positive influence, because they don't see you as somebody who's trying to fix them. They just see you as a guide who's there to help. And I'm not going to tell you what you should do, but I'm happy to give you advice if you want. Mm.
That's such a like powerful thing, and you're making me think back to a moment I had this past season where I think it was it's either between the first and it would have been between the second and third. So he ended up scoring at the end of the game on the far end of the ice. But a player came, it's like, yeah, it's just something didn't feel right on this rush. Like, what should I have done? I couldn't remember like the exact situation, but we started having a conversation. I'm like, okay, lay this out for me. Like, did it feel like to you? What did you see? Um, and then we just kind of diagnosed like, okay, what are the reads here? And the thing was, he went to the back post, and there was no lane there, and he was never going to get a puck. So it's like, okay, well, sell back post, go front post, create that little like mini 2-on-1 off the zone entry. And lo and behold, it never works out like this, it feels like, but it did today on that game, where he did actually took what we talked about on the bench as the Zamboni's going around, and I'm supposed to be, hightailing it to the other end for the team talk in between periods. But instead, we were having a good 5-minute conversation, basically killing half the time there. But it ended up resulting in that player being able to read the play on the ice and actually do something rather than just do this, just go to the net hard. Okay, cool. Well, he wouldn't have gotten into the right spot because he needed to go a little bit more this way rather than a little more that way. rather than being generic. It was like more specific into the details and the powerfulness of like having the player have that comfort, being like, ah, something didn't feel right here. Let me have a conversation. And being able to even set up those conditions, because as a player, I know there was only one coach or two coaches that I would have ever even considered doing that with, let alone actually doing it.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Like with half times, and the moment you're describing, it was between periods. Is that right? So with half times, there there is a tendency like, all right, I've got my 5 minutes. I've got to tell them. I've got to tell them. I've got to tell them. And it's like, give them time to decompress. Give them time to catch their breath. Give them time to just breathe. And then, what did you think? And oftentimes, most of the talking I end up doing is after the quote unquote, team talk, which is pretty standard. What did you think? What can we keep? What do we want to get rid of? And then, okay, the rest of the time is yours. And I just kind of come around, and then those questions will then pop up. I can't handle this outside winger. What should I do? And it's like, okay, now we can have the more meaningful conversations that are probably going to address things in a more applicable way than fix, fix.
I think the powerful bit about that, giving them space to decompress, is you're allowing some of that reflection. Now, not everyone's going to do that, and smart coaches are going to try to make that as an ingrained habit in the program of what we actually do. But then to your point of like, what did you see? What should we add? What should we take away? And letting them guide the conversation where their brains are getting a mental sweat, as White Goodman would say in movie Dodgeball, which is so powerful. I think another piece that I really enjoy doing is just like in the locker room, between periods, all the players are sitting, and every coach either like goes to the middle or standing by one of the doors, and even just like trying to get the energy of the room and read the players, just like sit down on the bench and just observe. Again, I'm going to come back to observing. I know we talked about it earlier, but just like the powerfulness and just being still and just taking that moment to see what's going on, see what's happening. Are they too stiff? Maybe they're too light. Like this past season, it was, I call it the season of belief. Because we have not been that great for a long time, and we've been building slowly but surely back. And this was the first season where I was like, we can compete with anyone in the state. Now, I'm not saying we're going to beat the top teams, but we can compete with anyone. And it was like the constant, like we go down by a goal, God, we're going to just die on the vine. So it was interesting to see the energy between periods where if we're up, we're down, and trying to almost coach them through the what if scenarios as well. If they do this, how are we going to respond? So I think from a team talk standpoint, it wasn't so much telling them what happened, reviewing, and how we can be better on that. It was also preparing for we score a goal, we get scored on, this happens, that happens, and just playing out the future potentialities. So we're preparing more so than telling. And kids are smart enough. We go down a goal. What should we do? Well, I should just give up and stop playing. That's not clearly not the right answer. Like, okay, we're gonna do it. Okay, well, it happens. What are we doing, guys? Boom, the whole bench is in that better mental space than they otherwise would.
No, I think a couple of things. I think first within that, I think being able to, it's like you have the technical nous to be able to be successful, but can you do it in the moment? I think part of the putting them in those situations in practice and giving those opportunities to suffer a little bit, like, oh, you're down a goal, you have 5 minutes to score, otherwise you're out. That practicing those situations is key. But then also you as the coach's role in that, like, how are you going to respond by engaging them with questions? What could we do here? I think when players know that you are investing in them in that way, and I'm going back to the questions things, it's such an effective way to establish trust. But you player A and you player B might have very, very different approaches to a similar situation, but investing in them with questions helps to guide them to, you might have this way that you want to do it, and that player might have that way to do it. But how can we be? What are we going to do as a unit? How can we be on the same page? I remember a moment in a semifinal game last year. where there was a similar kind of conversation. Player A wanted to do X, player B wanted to do Y. I need to step into the middle to add I'm the central defender. I want to step in the middle to clog the midfield more. And the other player was like, no, 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 you need to drop back further, more like a sweeper. And it was like, okay, we can't do one, or we have to you can't like one, we have to have a shared understanding of what's going to happen. What are we going to do? And they talked it out, and they figured it out, and it's like, okay, now it's going to be, now it's going to be meaningful, because instead of me just saying this and they're both frustrated because it's, like, I think it should have been like this. You have to be, as a player, the owner of the process in some situations like that, because otherwise, to your point earlier, I'm not going to be coaching you forever. If you don't have the tools to problem solve and mediate those kinds of things on your own, I can't do it forever. What do you, if I'm constantly just telling you and you listen and follow the instructions, how is that preparing you for success after you walk away from this experience?
Preparing for success after this experience, or like positive behavior after the experience. Yeah, pretty powerful. The thing I like that you mentioned was like they have to be the owners. I feel like a lot of coaches talk about everyone was bought in when you're winning, and if you're not doing so good, not everyone's bought in. Well, how do you create that buy-in? And to your point, if we're actually understanding, because there's a difference between knowing what to do and actually doing it. Just because knowledge is power and you know it doesn't mean there's an actual execution in there and you're willing to do the job. We'll look at the NHL, like how many guys are willing to buy into certain roles versus not. Like there's some great players that are in the minor leagues, could be in the NHL, but they're not willing to do what that coach is needing, what that team is needing. So there's a powerful bit on helping get that buy-in if we're in agreement, and even just like the coach saying, okay, what are you willing to actually do? We can plan and play around that. It's the old adage of like you go to war with the army that you have, not the one you wish you had.
There was a quote from and this is translated, so I'm paraphrasing a little bit from a translation from Marcelo Bielsa, the Uruguay coach. Uruguay, did not meet expectations in the World Cup, and they were eliminated. And afterwards, in an interview, he said, these players, blah 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 blah, and they came to me, and some of the leaders, the older players, came to me and said that I needed to shorten the team talks and video talks to 10 minutes, because they couldn't pay attention for longer than that. And he was like, these players, they won't, they're, and a lot of the commentary was like, oh, these players, they can't pay attention for more than 10 minutes. And it's like, if I had players come to me and say that I need to shorten my team talks, especially like the kind of leadership players, and I ignore that, like, how is that going to create buy-in? Because buy-in to me is one of those like, oh, these players, you're just seeking comfort for your own failures as a coach, because you can't meet those players where they're at. Right or wrong, if those players come to you with some feedback that you might not like, investigate that, explore that. Like, okay, what do you need? If you're a high school kid and you're coming to me and saying, hey, can we X? Like, okay, let's try that. Or tell me why. Like, what is the missing piece that you want to address? Okay, if I can have that conversation and meet you where you're at, it might not necessarily be the outcome that you want in terms of this is what it should be, but at least you understand that I'm willing to listen to you. So you're not gonna dismiss me, because buy-in, I think, works really the opposite way. Like, if you are not willing to buy into your players, how are they ever going to buy into you? Because when the coach typically says buy in, oh, they won't listen to me. I'm trying to convince them. I'm trying to convince them. You haven't listened to them. You haven't bought into them. You got to buy into them before they will, quote unquote, buy into you.
It's like asking a defender who's very slow to get close to a player that's very fast. Like it's probably not the best idea. So how do you actually work with what's in front of you, your current skill set, your current opponent, your current team, your current coach? Like how can we best work together? For players, it's always like how do you best lead up, across, and down as a leader? As a coach, you've got a lot of power. You determine playing time, which is the ultimate. So how do you wield these things for good? You actually get players to have that conversation, that buy-in, etc. So I think that's good. Anything else you'd add there? Otherwise, I think we were ready to turn the page a little bit.
No, and I think, and I say all these things, and in the back of my mind as I'm saying them, I'm like talking to myself. Even this past season, we had a situation with a player that, you mentioned playing time. She didn't feel like the playing time she was getting was equitable relative to her skill set. And I felt bad because this did come up to the end of the season. And I felt like if I had had a conversation with her earlier, and I needed to do a better job, again, buying into the players, having conversations with them, and just kind of giving them, an opportunity to voice or express, questions, concerns. And she, great kid, just wanted to, was trying to be respectful and didn't want to, bother me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is something I probably could have and should have addressed earlier. So, I say these things, and most of the time I'm like just talking to myself here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that. Yeah, I have those moments all the time. It's wild. I know sometimes I've changed positions on players. We're a public school, and if we got a lot of defenders pushing through, someone probably wants to go up front if you'd like some more playing time, or it can just be more effective for the team overall, and it's like a win-win. But they don't see it that way at all. So having those conversations and trying to understand the why, and here's my vision for you, and I think you could be really good at this, and maybe go through a little bit kicking and screaming where it's like I'm still the adult here. If you do this, I promise you're going to be okay on the other side. Just do a little buy-in. If it doesn't work and you're actually bought in, we'll make some changes. But if you're just not going to buy in, we're going to keep going. So you're only first,
Well,
stalling out whether you're going to have success where I think you have success, or you're going to have failure where you think you're going to have failure. We'll make a change. I'm not going to just like commit to this blindly. But it's just when you say that, I'm like, yeah, I've had those things where it's like I try my best, still human, still making mistakes, but trying to get that buy-in. Like, here's what the team needs. It's also going to be better for you, and here's why, and what I think, and give it your best. And if it doesn't work, but if you're not giving your best, I'm not changing it. You don't get
absolutely.
you don't get a promotion. You don't get what you want by doing a terrible job at wherever you're at in life. Where your feet are at.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, you're not going to please everybody. It's impossible, but you can do the best you can to make sure that, at least there was a conversation, I was listened to, I was respected, if I think that's a bare minimum, right? Because yeah, there's 11 starting spots and there's 18 players. Somebody's not gonna start, and if I can hide from it or hide behind it, can't do that. Can't do that.
All right. So next, I want to turn to the who do we coach when the ball is at their feet? Uh, and there's a great sentence. I'm just going to read it out because I think this will set the conversation up for success, which is language we use doesn't just instruct. It frames what players notice and how they can interact with their environment. Language can either open doors to possibility or close them down.
It's funny how all these things kind of like connect. That line right there basically goes back to that, the you need and you should. We have in our minds a vision of language as instruction to find the right answer. We sometimes will miss out on other possibilities. When we, using that defender situation that you described, you have a slow defender and a fast forward, and it's like you need to get tight on them. You need to get tight on them. How many doors is that closing to another way that slower player might be able to be successful in solving the problem, which is ultimately what we want to do, because the right answer of converging on one fixed solution, not only does it miss solving the problem in the moment, but it also conveys to that player, like, I'm not adequate. I'm not good enough. It's like, I can't do X. I must not be very good. And it's like, well, you might be able to do something different, but how can we explore different ways to approach this? I think that a lot of the impetus for that one was, you have a tendency, myself included, to coach the ball, whoever the player is on the ball. Hey, what are you going to do now? Can you do this? Can you do that? And it's like that ends up creating a perception that the only thing that is important is the player on the ball. The only thing that's important is the ball. And I'm not sure what it is in hockey, but in soccer, I mean, in a 90-minute game, you roughly have the ball like 3 or 4 minutes. So you spend the other 85, 86 minutes not having the ball. But if we as coaches are constantly ball instructing the player on the ball and not really addressing what else is going on around the ball or off the ball, we have a tendency to, well, it's not important. I don't have the ball. I'm not important. And so, opening up our lens of, what else is happening? The players on the ball here, what about the players around them? What about the players that are on the periphery? How engaged are they? And so when we end up coaching more off the ball and around the ball, it frees up opportunity for that player on the ball to make a decision, because if they're being constantly instructed, it's very, very difficult to make a decision. Second, it helps to incentivize, or not incentivize, but helps to, highlight that off the ball work is as or more important than on the ball work. How do you get the ball? If you don't have it, how are you going to get it? Where's the space that you can make to support the ball carrier? Where, how can we support? How can we break a line, not to the player on the ball, but to players off and around, to get them to attune to where is the space? Maybe there's space close by. Maybe there's space behind. Maybe I can make a diagonal run. What can I do off the ball to show that is as or more important than what's happening on the ball?
It is definitely more important than what's on the ball. Yes, you need to make good decisions on the ball or puck, but the players away from the object set the possibilities. Nothing worse than you get a playmaking player and set them with teammates that don't make movement into space, because it just shuts down all of the possibilities. So it's the old Russian Soviet hockey team where the four players away from the puck are extremely important. And the way they put this is the puck carrier serves the other four. Like that was the mentality, but realistically, it meant like you can get the puck at any time. You need to have movement that you can be served. And the player on the puck, you are serving your teammates. So it is not you going one on one. It's how can you work together as a unit. So, but for me, and this is another thing that the past season that we had, it was not like we needed to work harder. Like all the coaches when things aren't going great or you want better X, Y, and Z. It's always work harder, work harder, work harder. And it was just for us, it was work smarter. Like be engaged away from the puck. And it was the movement to make the passing possible. Without that movement, the passing wasn't possible. Without that movement, you didn't create the space for your teammates. Like, do you want your forwards on your defenseman's toes? Okay, well, where are they going to pass the puck? And they pass the puck and they still got to go through six guys? Or should we at least get one or two guys pushing back the defense, creating space underneath? So it's those players away that you want to coach a little bit more. Marty St. Louis, the Montreal Canadiens, that's what he talks about. It's like, I coach the players that don't have the puck. I coach away from the puck. Like, these guys are good enough, especially, if they're getting drafted and knocking on the door of the NHL, like they're going to figure it out. So it's more of like, what is the movement? What is the routing? That's truly what I'm trying to go towards coaching.
No, absolutely. There was a goal the other day. Brazil played Japan and scored in the 91st minute, and the everybody's like, oh, it was a great pass and finish by the guy who assisted, and Martinelli who finished. Martinelli, there you go. But one of the analysts was like, well, actually, it was Vinicius's spacing to pull a defender away from Martinelli that allowed the space to open up, so that I can't remember who made the assist, was able to more easily make that pass to Martinelli, who, because they had more time and space, had a little just that extra second to be able to make that finish. And it was like, if I was the coach, I'd be like, pass it here, pass it here, pass it here. And really it's like, no, you need to your point, who's off the ball that can make a run to influence the defenders to move away from the ball carrier or move away from more, effective options. And it's like, your point right there with if you have a creative player with five players who don't move or aren't noticing, it's like there's no playmaking is going to be able to happen. Hmm.
And I'll even just add on, like, if you're off the puck, the ball is like, how can you grab the defender, and even on the puck and ball, like, how can you grab the defender's attention and push them into bad spots? Like for me, I play roller hockey on Thursday nights, and I'm always constantly like, we need more guys to stretch, but don't just like stretch up the the rink, like your defender's automatically going to grab you. Like, okay, that's one on one. How can you lock that guy? Figure out how to get someone else's attention, even for a second, that allows someone else to be freed open by creating that one of me versus two defenders, or I've got two defenders' attention at the same time. Like that's clearly opening possibilities for everyone else. I may not get a point, but I'm affecting the play in my team's favor. Like, how do you grab the defender's attention? Or if you're on the puck, on the ball, like you've got your defender, how can you drive it maybe a different defender that's not yours, that's one of your teammates, and they're now like, okay, well, this guy's driving me, I've got to play them. In that moment, it's one versus two, which opens space for teammates, and hopefully that starts to fall the dominoes and the advantage and the puck or ball ends in the back of the net. So super important to even think about. And this is obviously a very high concept that not everyone can fully grasp right away, but just that idea of how do you grab defenders' attention?
I think in soccer, like the fundamental like core relationship is the player and the ball, and I think in a lot of ways, not that I'm not going to downplay that and say, oh, that's not important. It is, but I think the player opponent relationship and ultimately the player ball opponent relationship is probably more key. I think when we focus only on ourselves and the ball, we start to look at the opposition as is superfluous, is a problem, as opposed to like an opportunity. Like, how can you use what the defender is doing to be successful? Because ultimately, you're trying to score a goal and subsequently simultaneously stop them from scoring. It's a dual, constant, concurrent situation that requires you to attune to the defender. And if you are only focusing on the ball, and subsequently when you have the ball, you're going to miss those opportunities that you were just describing, like how can I drag a defender away? How can I lock a defender? If I'm off the ball and I'm looking like how exactly the same thing, the ball carrier's moving, I want to create space, but I also might want to get a defender to come with me to increase the likelihood that the player on the ball can continue moving forward. What does that look like? How do I get their attention? And so when we view the relationship of player opponent as very, very important, it opens up so many possibilities that players start going, oh, it's not just the ball, but it is a bigger picture than just me and the ball.
I think there was a really great clip of Argentina. I'll text it to you right now, where it was all about rotations. And soccer has this concept of like occupying space, like which space do you occupy? Well, there's also like I want to play into this space, so a teammate actually moves out of that space that we want to play into, which either drags the defense out of that space, and then someone attacks that space that was newly created. It's kind of the third man concept, but it's even more, I would say, wild and conceptual and probably more difficult for people to grasp because the third man run is like I pass the ball to player two and two dishes it off to player three, and that's the third man run. In this concept, that ball like may not even be passed. It's just someone's leaving space and someone else is entering into that space that is now vacated because the defense was taken out by a rotation. So you're thinking about rotations if you're into soccer. So it's something really cool. I think it's kind of hard to do it in this medium, so I think we drop it for now. But super important to understand of like power of movement and power of the gravity, the attention that you grab of the defense, and how might we manipulate that to our advantage. So that's number one. Next,
Absolutely.
I want to kind of go down into thinking about okay, on the ball, around the ball, off the ball, and then even on the sideline, because like even the moments of how we instruct, like there's the on-field stuff, but even like practice, like do we have the moments? Like where are we positioning ourselves where we might be towards the back of the line as a coach? So rather than in the middle of the drill or even part of the drill where I've got to make a pass, eliminate yourself from that. And now you can have conversations, ask these questions so they can explore. That's good in practice. And then thinking about it from an on the game of like, how do you help all of these different players? It's the classic, like I'm behind the bench and I'm talking my thoughts. So therefore other players can at least hear the thought process. Like there's one way of maybe helping players understand what we're looking to do, how we're looking to accomplish things. That's always great. But then to your point of like we always talk about on the ball. So maybe if we're shifting to players away from the ball, what are the questions we're asking? How are we approaching our language? What are we saying?
Yeah, I think for me, I use these. There's convergent, divergent. When we think convergence, we're leaning into a specific answer. 2 plus 2 is 4. We're converging on that specific answer. But if we're trying to get to point A to point B, there's multiple pathways that could exist. And if I'm trying to drive to school, I could take the main road, I could take the side roads. There's a few ways we could do it. Those are more like situationally convergent. Like we have a general goal in mind, but there's multiple ways we can do it. So we have our convergent, our situationally convergent, and we have like the divergent. And in that case, it's like we have a problem and we don't really know where the answer specifically is, but we know we have to navigate towards something in front of us. And so, very, very specifically, if I'm looking to finish, it's one-on-one with a goalkeeper, there's, how do we finish that situation? There's a convergent way to do it, maybe even situationally convergent. Maybe you can dribble the keeper, maybe you can finish from further away, but we have that very, very specific goal right there. Divergent is, that maybe the goal's not right in front of us. Maybe we're player, off the ball and I need to support, but that might be making that run in behind. Maybe that's making a diagonal run towards, maybe that's making a check run behind. What kinds of possibilities are in front of us and which specific language would be most effective. If I'm the coach on the sideline and I see the player off the ball on the touch line and they see the player on the opposite side, I might say, hey, how can we create or how can we destabilize the defense here? That is going to create a general impression of an idea, but it's going to be situationally convergent because they know that I'm asking them to destabilize the opposition. But there's a couple ways they can do it. Maybe they make a diagonal run across. Maybe they messy style, just kind of hold back, look for a way to move into space when the ball carrier moves their way. Or I can say, what can you do now? What are we going to do? Very, very, very divergent because there's not a specific intention behind it. I'm not asking or destabilize the opposition, but I'm asking you to do something. I'm asking you to tune to what is in front of you. What do you see? The most common. What did you notice? What did you see? That's the most common divergent question. So for me, when I'm looking at a player, I'm trying to ask myself, what are they seeing? And if I have no idea, what do you see? What can we do here? Okay. After the play's over, what did you see? What did you notice? What were you thinking when I asked that question? Okay, that helps me kind of put myself in your shoes so I can see a little bit better. And maybe if we're in one of those like very competitive situations, we're in a game and we want to make a little bit more of an intention, maybe I can use that situationally conversion. Hey, we need to break this line here. How can we get in behind the defense? How can we do this? Okay, I know my role now is to try to break this line. Maybe my run's going to be X, Y, and Z. And in those very, very, very specific situations, maybe you are playing against a very, very difficult opponent and you need to you need to instruct, which is very, very, it happens. Hey, run in behind, make that run right now. Diagonal run through behind the defense, make it. There's time and space for those as well. But again, if we're looking at, the kinds of language and the players in front of us, what is our role? Are we trying to instruct? Are we trying to guide? Are we trying to see from their perspective and focusing on those kinds of that lens of convergent, situational convergent, divergent helps us, I think, in a lot of ways, connect with the players, especially when you're trying to guide them as the bridge between things, as opposed to the instructor, making decisions for them. And going back to the off the ball, around the ball, I think you can be a little bit more divergent in those situations because typically there's going to be a little bit more time and space, especially off the ball. So you can have that more. What can we do here? What do you think? Where's the ball going to go? Where's the danger? Where's the danger going to come from? That helps really establish for that player, like, oh, my role is I have to be doing something here, and I'm not doing something. What could I be doing? Where is the space? What do I see?
I'm gonna try to my best to simplify this down, uh, to make it very easy for all of us to grasp because I think you're throwing out a lot of good stuff. But to our point of like trying to meet people where they're at, we're going super deep, and I love it. So I'm gonna try to summarize and be the idiot. trying to learn from you here. So when we're thinking player in possession and we're trying to coach them, it's around reminding of intention. So it should be like short, very specific cues that remind us of intention of what we're trying to accomplish. Um, Close support, more around convergent questions to focus intention. So like, where is the space behind? If you do blank, cue them towards areas of opportunity. Um, how can you create space for your teammates? Something like that would be another one. Then thinking about like far support. So close support would be near the ball or puck. Far support would be, other side of the field, other side of the rink. Um, Around just like the question to calibrate their attention and intention. Like what should they be thinking? Where do they think the opportunity is going to lie soon? Or even like defenders, right? Putt's not there, players aren't there. It's like where where are your eyes? Where's danger coming from? They've got a little more time to think. They can, so do a little bit more. So like very sharp with player in possession, pressure's coming to you right now. Low support. Okay, you got a little more time, but still need to be very quick on it. And then that far support even further away. And then thinking about just like bench and sideline of, open up almost a conversation of sorts, especially if we're able to get, maybe even just standing on a bench where you can see a little bit better, where it's trying to, what else could she have done there? What could, Johnny have done with the puck there? How's the puck management? You whatever connecting to your thing is and helping them fill the what ifs. So hopefully when they have that in the game, they can actually execute on it. So where am I off? Where am I good?
No, I think it's great. The one example I didn't give with like on the touch line, we and this popped in my mind. We were playing a conference opponent. It was a very difficult game. It was like 1-1. It was very very intense. Um, and one of our outside defenders needed to come off, and the player who's going to replace her, sophomore, very good player, but it's a heated game, and she's stepping onto the field, first year on varsity, and she's on the side, waiting to go on, and I can see this look on her face, and so I walk up, I'm like, hey. And I was like, hey, she's like, Coach Nick, I'm very scared. I'm very scared. And I could see the emotion on her face. And I was like, okay, what? She's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I'm like, okay, well, in this situation, I'm not going to ask you, what do you think? Because she needs guidance at that moment. Now, I don't want to tell her so specifically, like, you need to do X and Y, because that's way too, she's going to have to, she needs that intentionality. She needs that situationally convergent intention. And I think the language you used actually is far better. What's the intention? And so for her, it's like, okay, you're going into right back. Do you want to attack and kill, or do you want to protect? And she's like, I'm like, I think protect. I'm like, I think that's a great idea. All you need to do is protect. Just protect your center back. That's all you got to do. Just protect. And she's like, okay. Just aligning that intentionality, whatever decision she makes is going to be based on, am I protecting my center back? And so I don't have to attack. I don't have to kill. I don't have to worry about making runs. I just need to make sure that I'm in a position where I can eliminate the opposition from getting 1v1s or 2v1s on my center back. And so, again, that range of outcomes, if she's on the field and it's like she doesn't see the outside defender, or she doesn't see the outside winger going around her, absolutely, that language is gonna be very direct. It's gonna be very specific. But in that moment on the touch line, she just needs to be aligned with some intentionality, just to kind of focus in on what are we trying to do. I
Yeah,
do want to take a moment to
guiding the attention is so critical because it allows that intention where they're still in the driver's seat, but you're actually accomplishing. I call that commander's intent. Like, what do we need to accomplish as a group? Where's your piece in that? And yeah, so I love where you're heading. All right, keep going.
No, I was just gonna say I wanted to real quick. That article I wrote was co-written with Coach Luca if you are on X, formerly Twitter, he did a ton with that article specifically with a lot of the diagrams and some of the specific language cues that are on that. So if you're listening, you do happen to see that article and dig into it, please give him a follow because he did a lot with that. Just want to acknowledge him there. Um, yeah, it's funny how a lot of these things, the all kind of tie in together. What's the role of the coach? Is are we prescribing? Are we guiding? And then based off of that intention, what is my role? What am I trying to do? That's going to cascade into different kinds of language that, if I want to be a guide, is instruction, is prescription the best way, or is that the primary way, or is that more like tertiary? And so, how we view our role is subsequently gonna make a huge impact on how we communicate with players.
All right, so now we got to take this from the world of concept and actually execute on it as coaches. So I'll say that the first step is just like key into what's your default. So whether it be like recording yourself, even on the phone, um, those advanced ones can pick out a lavalier and have someone record you from a distance. Like they have all those mic'd up videos. So just notice like where are you focusing your attention and your communication? Or is it always on the puck? Is it always on the ball? Is it players off? Are you asking questions? Are you doing the I should, you need? Just notice. So again, first step is observing what's happening and trying to get in the frame where you're almost looking at yourself from the outside a little bit. That'll be step number one. I think that is the key bit, and just don't try to do too much with it. Just focus on one little piece and then the next piece and then the next piece. But just start with one, record yourself, or just notice where, when I'm wanting to communicate or when I jump in, what am I actually jumping in on, and what kind of ways am I jumping in? Am I doing I should, you should type language?
I think that's a great starting point. Because here's the challenge, right? Like if you were to take a player out and replace them with, in a professional game, if you were to take out Martinelli out of Arsenal squad and you replaced him with somebody from the crowd, or you were to replace Arteta with, with an amateur coach, which one would be more noticeable? Like, would you notice that it's a different an amateur coach versus like an amateur from the crowd now on the field? The amateur player would be immediately noticeable. When we look at our roles as coaches, it's very, very difficult to when we think I want to get better and improve. It's like it is so difficult because it's the time scales of how our impact is. It's very rarely immediate. It happens much more over time. And so when we are looking at ourselves, we're like, oh, am I getting better? It's harder to tell because you can't really tell in that moment. Like the pass was made, the pass wasn't. Was that the best way to say it, or not the best way to say it? And so I 100% agree. I think, giving yourself grace in knowing that mistakes are going to be made. I make them daily, constantly. But, and so just recognizing that it's okay, but then to the action step, yeah, I mean, record yourself. What do you notice? What do you see? And then I think what you just said right there, pick one thing. You're not trying to solve the world's problems. Pick one thing. What might you do differently? What's one thing that you think you might want to change? What else could you do? The same thing you're asking players. What else could you do there? What else could I do there? And then I would also add in just engage with others. If you don't have, and I don't want to say like necessarily like a mentor or a like somebody like quote unquote better than you, but just somebody that you can connect with is vital. Being able to have like a community or a connection point with coaches where you can feel trust and vulnerability to be able to have that conversation is key. So I think action step 100%. If you're wanting to improve, videotaping yourself or audio recording yourself, is what you are saying what you're actually saying, and what is one thing you might shift or change, and then how can you enlist support with others in similar roles to get some feedback for yourself.
Yeah, I love that bit of like just asking yourself the question, right? Just as Arson was like, ask yourself the right questions. Like, are you asking yourself the right question? And even just the basic one of like, what did I like about this? What did I not like about this? reflecting on your one little bit that you wanted to do on. Um, so I love it. Anything else we should add? Otherwise, I've got one quote from your article that I would love to end on.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. I'm gonna just jump in here with a quick. I'm advertising, I guess. I've never done this before. So myself, and Dr. David Farouk, and Jesse Rawlings as well. We're going to be starting Transforming Soccer. It's a branch of Transforming Sports, started by founder Alex Sarama with Transforming Basketball. He's currently the Portland Fire WNBA coach, and so we're expanding the Transforming brand, and so Transforming Soccer will be going live later this month. And so if you're interested in constraints-led approach, ecological dynamics, or any of the kinds of concepts that we've talked about or I've talked about today, I encourage you to check that out. So that's my throw out there. Thank you.
Beautiful. It's something we can always get better at, and how do we transform it for the best of everyone. So, ending on, coaching isn't about filling the game with our voice. It's about framing attention so players can explore, decide, and connect. So, how can we best find ways that players can explore, decide, and connect? To your point, I think there's a lot to do with engagement, do no harm. Where do we form attention? How do we remind around attention? Guide rather than tell. All of these things. So, Nick, appreciate you taking the time to come on and share some wisdom. And thanks for writing two super impactful newsletters that I think really dive into the heart of a lot of these things that branch into the rest of the programming and our ability to make a positive impact.
Well, thank you, Greg, for having me. I always enjoy our conversations, and I hope that if you're listening to this, you got something out of it, and look forward to next time, man. Thank you so much.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.